episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Apologies for there not being a show last week, but unfortunately I had to do a 6-day week, so there just wasn't the time available to entertain you guys. But obviously, as you can see, I'm back, and hopefully today's episode will be an entertaining episode. So, as you can see from the title picture, we're looking at a selection of bottlings from the Lakes Distillery in the Lake District, funnily enough, and it's basically because they kindly sent me samples of the new bottlings in their blend called the One. Now, basically, the One, I believe, was released in, I think, around about 2015, and to be honest with you, it was a bit of a gimmick. The whole premise of it was a blend of malt and grain taken from all the sort of components of the UK, shall we say so, England, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, and I suppose. I mean, the thing is, I've got no real issue with gimmicks. There have been some ridiculous gimmicks, sort of like, to sell blended whiskies and things like that, made up stories of ghosts and sort of, fictitious travellers. And so I suppose in essence you could say, although it was a bit of a gimmick, there was a bit more substance, shall we say, to the whole idea of the gimmick. And, it was the One, it was a British Isles whiskey, and I suppose if there hadn't been a large component of rather industrial Glenrothes in the blend, it would have probably been it would have been alright, it would have been a pleasant blend. As it was, that Glenrothes element really did kind of like do it a disservice, and I believe that the range was relaunched I think it was about a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago. I certainly know Daval Gandhi, or Mr. Gandhi as I'll call him, because I can never I can't pronounce this Christian name. I can't talk anyway. Anyway, so he joined the distillery, I believe I think it was 2016, and as you well know, came from Macallan, loves his oak, all that kind of stuff, and we will get on to talking about that in a minute, but basically I think what he did was he kind of cleaned up the One. He sort of removed the gimmicky element, and it's now basically a blend of Speyside, Highland, Islay, and the Lake's own spirit, which makes a lot more sense really when you think about it, and certainly ditched the Glenrothes, and now it's not a bad blend. I love the bottles. I know that at the end of the day, labelling, bottlings, all that kind of frippery is not really that of it. It's the juice in the bottle at the end of the day that counts. But in saying that, I think they've done a nice job in the packaging. Talking of packaging, most distilleries kind of send samples, they just wrap them up, stick them in an envelope and what have you, and to be honest with you, I don't really care how they come. But I will say, for one thing, they've sent their samples out in really nice packaging. So alright, it looks a bit like a perfume package, but it's really quite cool. Look, sort of little space there for the miniature, and it just goes to show that it's that attention to detail, I think, that's it just shows what they're all about, that the fact that they're prepared to go that little bit of an extra distance with packaging for samples, which at the end of the day is neither here nor there. Nobody really cares at the end of the day, because they just want to taste the juice, but it goes to show their attention to detail and what they're trying to do, and if they're kindly going to send me samples, I'll review them. And so basically, going back to the One business, the original blend really wasn't a great deal of cop, but like I said, so Mr. Gandhi gets his hands on it, and suddenly we've got weird cask finishes, but the main thing is, and I can't say that I haven't tasted the signature bottling that they now call it for quite some time, but they cleaned it up, and it's a better blend. Certainly the limited release edition bottlings sit on the shelf at sort of 40 something odd quid. So it's not a cheap blend. And you know, I think sort of originally, like with a lot of new releases, new blends and things like that, they went for off-the-shelf bottles, you know, the sort of brookladdy, stubby kind of bottles, which I couldn't tell you what they're called. I'm sure they have a technical term or technical name. So it's all about keeping costs down, and I think the original bottling of the one wasn't particularly expensive. But now they've invested a bit of money in it, bespoke bottles, all that kind of stuff, and obviously the price has gone up. So the question is it worth that price? And of course, obviously, we'll find out. Now, the other bottling we'll be looking at, aside from the actual lakes bottling themselves, is is one called steel bonnets. Now, talking about sort of slightly iffy concepts for bottles, this is a blended malt, a blend of English, which I believe is their own spirit, along with Scottish malt. And the story is all about, you know, the wars between the English and the Scottish, and how it's all harmonious now, and all that kind of stuff. And steel bonnets obviously is talking about, you know, refers to the helmets that the soldiers used to wear. Yeah, okay. And I believe so. So it's the lake's own malt, and I believe it's along with some Bonnet, Glenrothes, and an undisclosed distillery. Don't know why it's an undisclosed distillery, but there you go. Yeah, at least they tell you a couple of things. So basically, yeah, that's their blended malt. Can't remember what it retails for, and you know, we'll obviously kick off with that and see where we go from there. The last thing that I want to say, obviously, about the distillery, so I'm pretty much sort of talked about the lineup before we've even talked about the lineup, haven't I? But obviously, when the distillery was first built, and I think I probably mentioned it in the episode I did a few weeks ago on English whiskies, the distillery, interesting enough, on the spirit still has two types of condensers. It has a standard copper shell and tube, and a stainless steel shell and tube, and so obviously, you know, the distillery was set up to produce a lighter and a heavier spirit, and I begged the distillery to get me some samples of the new make or an American oak, but they just will not play ball. And this is all because Mr. Gandy doesn't want you to know what the distillery's character is. He just wants to play around with the oak. Fine, got no problem with that. You know where you are with that. You know, and it's like, you know, if you want to buy a bottle of like the Whiskey Maker's edition or any other bottling that the Lakes Distillery release, you have to realise that there's going to be an awful lot of wood. And fine, but I just still love to know what the character of their spirit is, but don't think that's ever going to happen. But anyway. We're not here to sort of like talk about that. We're obviously to take a look at the samples that I have. So now I will introduce the line. So like I said, we're going to kick off with the steel bonnet. So this is the blended malt. It's a blend of English and Scottish whiskey, the English being obviously the Lakes, the Scottish being Glenrothes, Bonnet, and the undisclosed distillery. It's bottled at 46.6. I believe it was released in 2018, mid-2018, and well, certainly that was the first time I tasted it. And it's won awards. You know, I think the latest one was Best English Blended Malt in the 2019 World Whisky Awards. So, well, maybe it's not too shabby. Anyway, the next one we're going to move on to is the first of the 3-1 bottlings. This is the Orange Wine Cask Expression. So this has been finished, the blend has been finished in Vino de Naranja. Foreign words. Sorry if you're Spanish and I've just murdered your language, but there you go. So comes from Andalusia. And it's finished in those casks. Now, orange wine is all very big at the moment. It's very in. And for those of you that don't know, orange wine is a white wine. It's essentially had prolonged skin maceration to extract the colour. Hence the colour, they tend to look a bit sort of orangey or have an orange tinge. And as you can see, it sort of has an orange tinge to it. Now, this is the orange wines are all tied up in this whole concept of natural wines, which always makes me laugh, really, when you think about it, because, you know, they say, right, so we make a natural wine, but all other wine is unnatural. How does that work? Anyway, so natural wines are all made with, you know, well, not all made in amphora, but buried in the ground. But, you know, a lot of them tend to be made in that way, sort of very minimal oak, natural yeasts, all that kind of stuff, low, if any, sulphur at all. And they often tend to have a very cider apple-y kind of character, and again, it's the biggest issue I have with natural wines, is that in a lot of cases the cider apple, which I'm guessing is probably sort of bacteria because of the lack of sulphur. Sulphur dioxide is used as sort of like an antibacterial agent, and I'm guessing it's probably, I would say it's either that or it's a combination of that and the natural yeast. And you get, that's all the character you get. You very rarely get sort of terroir, grape typicity. They tend to be like sherry monsters. Anyway, but it'll be interesting to see. You know, I've never seen a whiskey finished in an orange wine cask before, so yeah, I think that's going to be really, really intriguing. Moving on, this is the port finish. Again, bottle of 46.6%, and this time the blend has been finished in both ruby and tawny port casks. So it'll be interesting to see if we can pick up the individual port cask characters in that. The third one is, as you can see from the colour, don't think I need to tell you that that's the sherry edition, finished in XPX and X Oloroso casks. So yes, don't expect much in the way of spirit character there, I think. But anyway, we shall see what that's like, and you know, I think it's going to be interesting. And the final one we'll be looking at is a brand new bottling. This is the Lakes Whisky Makers Edition Colheita Port finish. Now, bottled of 52% exactly. It's kind of, I'm assuming this is a sort of like a kind of a, it's not the Whisky Makers range. I think this is kind of a new range that they've kind of created. It's basically finished in Colheita port cask. Now, Colheita, for those of you that don't know, is a relatively rare form of tawny port, and as far as I'm aware, there's only a handful of producers that actually make this, because basically it's a tawny port that all comes from a single vintage. So you have, obviously, with a normal tawny port, you're blending from various vintages, because the idea is, like a blended whiskey, to create practically the same bottling year in, year out. So it's like champagne, it's a house style, that kind of thing. Whereas obviously, you know, an individual vintage will have nuances of the vintage. Now, certainly one of the most well-known port producers is Newport, that we stock, and there is a slight difference. It's difficult to sort of pick out a huge difference between, say, their 10-year-old tawny and their Colheita, which is about 12 years old, I think, off the top of my head, 2004, so it's 12, 13, something like that. But it's interesting, it's a bit quirky, it's a bit different, and we'll see how it's influenced the whiskey. So yeah, I've waffled, I think, for far too long, so let's taste some whiskey. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the steel bonnets. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Well, right off the bat, you can get the Glenrothes. It has that slightly industrial character. It's not dirty or nasty, but it's industrial. It's, you know, it's a bit hard work. There's a little bit of white fruit, a little bit of malt, touch of spice possibly, maybe a little bit of smoke, but it's that Glenrothes character that is pretty much the most dominating theme, and I'm not warming to it, has to be said, whatsoever. It's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's, you know, it has character. It's just that character is not the sort of character I particularly enjoy. Anyway, let's see what passes on. There is some oak there. So it kind of kicks off with a little bit of the American oak. Then I get the sherry cask coming through. Again, it's that slightly hard industrial Glenrothes character. A little bit of spice. It's a bit short. It's a bit tannic, and that industrial character just keeps going and going. There's a sort of wininess, a little bit of a grapiness on the finish. It's okay. I mean, it's certainly not an unpleasant blended malt. It's just the components, or one of the main components, just really isn't my cup of tea. But if you like that sort of style, then certainly you'd appreciate it. But for me, not what I'm going to regulate. Right, okay, so let's move on to the one orange wine expression. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? That's a nice nose, actually. It's quite full, it's quite heavy, it's quite barleyed. It's got a distinct sort of late harvested honeyed wininess. A little bit of oxidised fruit. And yes, there is, I don't know whether it's subliminal or whether it is actually there, but I can pick up a faint orange note. It's got a softness, it's got a roundness, but there's an edginess there as well. The grain, although not hugely noticeable, is just adding a little balance, a little edginess, a little graininess, and it needs that because it is getting sweeter. The wine notes are becoming more noticeable. I'm getting more sweet apricot, that kind of thing. A little bit of dried fruit as well, more honey. I mean, it's a lovely nose. I really like that. You know, I think that is just really pleasantly balanced. It's not too oaky. There's certainly enough balancing notes in there, certainly from the grain component. See what passes like. Full, honeyed. Now I'm getting a lot of French oak, toasty French oak. Really comes through on the mid palate, dissipates a little bit on the finish as the sort of the grain component comes through, and a little bit more dried fruit and spice comes through. That's got a lovely progression. I like that. I think that's again balanced, not too sweet. It is more towards the sweeter end of the spectrum, but there's a nice balance. I'm getting a little bitterness now, right on the aftertaste from the oak. I think that's really impressive, really pleasant. And for 40 odd quid, you know, again, it's, you know, you have to sort of go, okay, it's a blend, okay, but it's an orange wine cask finish. Oh, that's a bit interesting. And you know, I think it is interesting. That's really nice. That's really bad. Okay, so let's move on to the one port cask expression. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Young, cereally spirit, quite herbal, almost botanical. It's got some black fruit. Sweet black fruit, a little bit of red fruit, really aromatic, really juicy. Again, the wood is subtle. I'm getting a little bit of vanilla. It certainly feels like Now I'm assuming that the blend for the one is all the same blend and just finished in the different casks, but and maybe it's because the port cask notes are more subtler. I'm getting more youthful notes, youthful spirit. I must admit the previous bottling, the orange wine cask was more about the wine cask and but again sort of, you know, and balanced, but and I didn't really pick up a huge amount of youthful spirit character. But so this is kind of a little bit more laying bare the sort of the character of the blend, and there's a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of sweetness from the American oak. Yeah, I mean, again, I think that's not too shabby. I mean, I've tasted port cask finishes that are, you know, way more portier than this, and so, you know, Mr. Gandy's being a little bit subtle here on the port. And you know what? Again, I think it's a pleasant blend. Let's see what it smells like. Lovely chocolatey aftertaste and finish. Again, balanced, subtle port, a little bit more noticeable port on the palate, a little bit more noticeable black red fruits, but again, certainly on the mid palate, I get the graininess, which kind of freshens it a little bit, and then some vanilla comes through, a little bit of barley. The finish is a little austere, I will give you that. It's a little bit citric, a little bit young. It's certainly not, doesn't taste quite cereal as the sort of like the nose kind of implies. But it's got a lovely chocolatey finish and aftertaste, and I really like that. Again, I think it's really well balanced, and yeah, I'm certainly more. Okay, so let's move on to the one sherry cask expression, bottled up like the others at 46.6. Let's see what the nose gives us. Oh, that's a chunky sherry monster. Very clean. Yeah, no off notes, no sulphur. Herbal, oloroso, charred oak, PX winey fruits, treacle, sweet fruit. It's sweet sherry. There's a little bit of toasty oak, but there's no spirit character whatsoever. It's kind of, yeah, toasty oak, toasty European oak, lots of sherry. It is what it is. If you like that kind of thing, then you know you'll love it. To me, well, you know, it's the least well balanced of the three, shall we say? So that's on. Whoa, that's oak overkill. Loads and loads of toasty European oak, herbal, oloroso, a little bit of PX kind of winey fruit, soft. Although there is a little bit of bitterness, a little bit of edginess there, right on the corners or the edges of the mouth, I should say. Pleasantly spiced finish. Yeah, it is what it is, okay? It's a big sherry monster. It's not, as you well know, not exactly my favourite style of spirit, but it's chunky, but it does have an element, I will give it that, an element of elegance to a certain extent. Although, like I said, it's all very, very woody. And although I don't get a mouthful of splinters, you know, it is certainly a sort of like, you know, you've got to love your wood if you're going to enjoy this particular blend. But Yeah, again, I can't argue with it. The quality is pretty good. There's no off notes, and yeah, it's okay. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Whiskey Makers Edition, as opposed to the, what they call the other one, Whiskey Makers Reserve, I think. Anyway, so this has been finished, I imagine, in ex-Colheita port casks. Let's see what those give us. Ooh. Ooh, Mr. Gandy, you've slipped up a bit here. I can smell some character, some spirit character. Ooh, barley. I get malt. I get, yes, I get the sort of slightly tawny fruits, the dried fruit. Again, it's quite young. There's a bit of Weetabix, a bit of biscuitiness, black grape, pepper. There's a slight floral note as well. But hello, I can get some barley now. I'd like to say I can get fruit, but I can't quite. Like I said, I can pick up some barley notes. I can pick up some obvious spirit character, but it's just hidden a little bit too much. And it's kind of like, it's teasing me. It's sort of saying, yes, look, spirit character. It's a slight potpourri note has kind of come out now, it has to be said. It's a little bit, yeah, a little bit floral. But, you know, I think it's quite pleasant. And like I said, whoa, my God, some spirit character. Whatever next? They'll be releasing an American Oak Age version. Go on, I dare you. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Right, we're back on familiar territory now. More port character. Quite winey, dried fruit, porty, sweet black fruit. Again, I can, maybe it's because I'm kind of searching for it. I can get a bit of barley, a bit of spirit character on, certainly on the mid palate, before the sort of herbally sort of cask kind of comes back on the finish. It's almost again, I'm getting that slight sort of, quite go as far as saying perfumed, floral, slightly violety character, and a little bit of spice. Again, I kind of quite like that. I'll put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. But I suppose sort of like, certainly from a nasal perspective, it was like, hello, a bit of spirit character, what's going on here? Anyway, let's see what a little drop of water does to it. Ooh. Now that's really sort of pushed back the port character, and I'm getting some quite oily fruit now. Ooh, Mr. Gandy, you have slipped up here, mate. I'm guessing that they probably used the heavier spirit, so the spirit that's been distilled with the stainless steel shell and tube condenser. That would make sense, because the sort of like the slightly more heavier spirit will generally, as they have a tendency to stand up to the sort of like, you know, punishment by wood. But yeah, I mean, now, is this the character of the Lakes whiskey that I'm getting? I mean, it's a possibility. It has a weight, it has some oiliness, there's some barley, it's a softness. It obviously is able to be bottled at a relatively young age, because it's certainly, although it doesn't have that sort of off the stilly kind of character, I wouldn't have said this is much older than, well, it can't be that much older than about sort of, what, 5 maybe. A touch of vanilla as well. Let's see what it tastes like now. well. Oily fruit. Yes, there's still a little bit of port cask, but it's not a huge amount of it. And I'm getting, like I said, I'm getting oily apricot, a little bit of barley. It's quite a weighty, dense spirit character. And, well, I think this is probably the closest we're ever going to get to actually tasting the actual spirit character of the Lake's whiskey. Well, would you believe it? So, yeah, now I just wish that they'd actually released this. This is to you, the distillery. Why didn't you release this with the Whiskey Makers Reserve? And then I could have bought a case of it, and I wouldn't have to worry about your minimum orders. Yes, well, that would have made my life a lot bloody easier, I can tell you. But anyway, coming back to the whiskey itself, it's like I said, it's stick some water with it, and I'm getting a bit of distillery character. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to the Lakes Distillery for the samples for today's episode of the show. I'd like to think it's been a balanced review, as always, and, kicking things off with the steel bonnets, it's not my cup of tea. I mean, it's an okay blend, and it's, if you like that sort of slightly industrial style of spirit, then fine, you'll enjoy that blend. For me, it's a little bit more of a sort of an endurance, shall we say, rather than an enjoyment. But there you go. As they say, you can't please everybody. Onto the 3 bottlings from the one blend. Firstly, I think that the blend as a whole is considerably better than what it was. It is a distinct improvement, shall we say, on what it originally was. Weird and wonderful wine cask finishes. Why not? Okay, the wine cask is quite dominant. As is that the case, but it's interesting, and there's a nice interplay between the wine cask and the American oak cask that's obviously originally been matured in, and there's a lovely level of complexity. There's some interest. It's different, and we all want something a bit different. And if you're open to sort of like suggestion of trying something a bit new, a bit left field, then that's certainly worth a go. The port cask one, again, I think that was really well balanced. I got some inkling of spirit character. It was not just a complete port overkill. Yes, the port was probably slightly more dominant on the palate than it was on the nose, but again, I thought it was really nicely balanced, really well balanced. Again, good price. And a really good quality product, and I suppose you could say to a certain extent the same for the sherry expression. A little bit more heavier on the finish, but that's to be expected. Again, good quality, plenty of both Oloroso and PX cask notes. So if that's your cup of tea and you're on a bit of a budget, certainly nothing wrong with that at all. And on to the Whiskey Makers edition. It's nice to see sort of like, slightly more unusual casks being used. I mean, it would be nice to see, and I imagine they probably have got some Amontillado, some Fino, that kind of thing knocking about in their warehouses. And certainly if this is anything to go by, they've probably got some pretty weird stuff. Maybe they've got some Swedish cloudberry wine casks. Have a word with Mac Myra if not, and get hold of some, because that could be quite interesting. Bit novel, bit different. Yeah, why not? English-Swedish collaboration. There you go. That's something for you, Mr. Gandhi, possibly. So yeah, really intriguing. Like I said, it's probably the first time I've ever tasted a whiskey from the Lakes Distillery where I could taste some spirit character, and it's kind of hallelujah. There is some spirit underneath all of that wood, yeah, good. Maybe one of these days you'll go, well, bugger you, I'm going to release an American oak aged version, and you can, there you go, and you can see what the distillery character is all about. I challenge you to do so. Whether of course he will or not, of course, is another matter. Probably won't, because, well, he loves his oak, as you well know. But then again, you know, how about a French oak? You know, American oak, French oak. You know, lots of oak. Maybe we'll get them. You know, I'm probably getting away with myself here. But anyway, like I said, big thank you to the distillery for the samples for this week's episode of the show. Hope you've not been too disappointed with my review. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. It's always fun, and well, all I have to say is, as per usual, good ramming and good afternoon.